Welcome to Philoctetes. I'm Edward Nersessian, and Francis Levy and I are co-directors of the center. The art on the wall, which I'm sure drew your attention as you came to this floor, was curated by Hallie Cohen, assisted by Adam Ludwig. It masterfully relates to our series of 6 roundtables on sexuality, beginning with today's roundtable, Mating in Captivity. The other 5 are Love and Sex, Love Code, Body Image, Voyeurism, and Paraphilias. They will, as usual, be multidisciplinary. For example, the roundtable on voyeurism will have an ex-exotic dancer and professor of anthropology, and the paraphilia roundtable will have a dominatrix, author of the book Concertina. During the same period as the 6 roundtables, there will be a poetry program, The Poetry of Eros, and 2 films related to the themes. We are considering Blow Up of Antonioni for voyeurism and Salo or Teorema of Pasolini for the paraphilias. In addition to these, we will be continuing our usual program, which involves the music program, both jazz and classical, films and other roundtables, most notable a roundtable on Shakespeare and another on legal imagination. And the rest of them are on our website if you want to check. One of the hopes we had when we decided to simulcast our programs was that they would have an educational usefulness in other parts of the world. And I would like to read to you an email we received last week. I have just discovered Philoctetes, and I'm just going through all those totally fascinating past programs available online, and just wanted to drop you a short thank you note saying that I'm absolutely enthralled by the roundtable discussions I've seen so far, and I'm very grateful for this. I live in Poland, Warsaw. My name is Joanna Grijink, by the way. I'm majored in literature during my studies. I'm preparing for the PhD program entrance exam. Your online resources are the only opportunity for me to participate as an audience in such interesting discussions with such prominent guests. The title of today's roundtable is from a book written by one of the participants today, Esther Perel, and it is available for those who would like to purchase it in the hall outside. As is the book by Pamela, the 2 books by Pamela Paul, Pornified and Parenting, Inc., and the book by Michael Kimmel, Guyland, and a book by Owen Renik, Practical Psychoanalysis for Therapists and Patients. In addition, there is Francis Levy's book, Erotomania, a Romance, which keeps getting great reviews and is attracting a great deal of attention. Now, finally, back to today's program. Dr. Owen Renik, an old and good friend from San Francisco, will be moderating the discussion. Owen is professor of psychiatry at the University of San Francisco and training and supervising analyst at the San Francisco Psychoanalytic Institute. He is the past editor of the premier psychoanalytic journal, which is the Psychoanalytic Quarterly. And he's the author of numerous papers, important psychoanalytic papers, and the book that I mentioned.
Oh, well, hello, everybody. You know, the Philoctetes Center likes to encourage as wide-ranging and informal a discussion as possible. And I think what we'll be talking about this afternoon is particularly well-suited to that agenda. It's not an esoteric topic. I think it's likely that just about everybody here has had some experience with sexuality within a monogamous partnership and how that plays out, and has probably formed an idea or 2 about the matter. So I think we can look forward, at least I hope so, to a lively interchange. The format will be that first the panelists, the roundtable, will bat some questions around for a while, and then at a certain point, we'll open it up and invite everybody to join in. Okay? Now, let me introduce the panelists, which I'll do extremely briefly because you all should have this handout with the same biographical information that I do. But just to mention that in alphabetical order, Michael Kimmel is an internationally recognized expert in the area of masculinity, a professor of sociology at SUNY Stony Brook, and the author of many books on the subject, and the editor of the scholarly journal Men and Masculinities. Francis Levy is the author of a recently published novel, Erotomania, a Romance, described as delightfully raunchy, among other things. And as Ed said, is getting terrific reviews, but he's a published author previously in many places that you're familiar with, the Times, the Washington Post, the New Republic, and so on. Okay, Pamela Paul is the author of The Starter Marriage and the Future of Matrimony, which I'm sure you know stirred quite a bit of controversy when it came out a while back, and also author of another book which bears on our subject, Pornified, How Pornography is Damaging Our Lives, Our Relationships, and Our Family. And she, too, Pamela, is a frequent contributor to the Times and other places that you're likely to run into her work. And finally, Esther Perel is a family therapist who spends her time in Antwerp, in Tel Aviv, and in New York, where she has a full-time practice in family therapy. And she's on the faculty of the Department of Psychiatry at NYU Medical School. And she's the author of Mating in Captivity, Reconciling the Erotic and the Domestic. It is the title of Esther's book that we have appropriated for the title of the Roundtable. And so it's been suggested to me that we begin by directing a question to Esther, but it's one that I hope everybody will want to chime in on. And it's really designed to give Esther an opportunity to elaborate on the title which we've taken. Esther, your book, Mating in Captivity, the title refers to a poem by D.H. Lawrence entitled Wild Things in Captivity, in which Lawrence asserts his conviction that domesticity is a cage, and the human animal, when confined to that cage, cannot be fully sexual. Well, the question I would like to pose to you is, was Lawrence right? That is to say, pardon? Well, somebody has answered it already. Wait. Okay, what was Lawrence right in this sense? That is to say, is there an inevitable contradiction between pursuing sexual life to the fullest and maintaining a long-term monogamous partnership? Does that involve a trade-off that requires a degree of sexual inhibition? Or, on the other hand, is it actually in principle not true because, in fact, there are no limits to the new possibilities which that limitation offers, as well as to some that it may, in fact, foreclose?
Okay, Mating in Captivity was related to the poem of Lawrence, but I found the poem later. The first people who inspired me were the panda bears and the bonobo apes, because they also could not mate. And they had to be shown porn in order to actually become aroused so that they would mate while they were in the same cages with each other. So the term actually comes from the animal kingdom and from anthropology. I don't know if Lawrence was right. Actually, I don't think there is an absolute answer to that. That changes from person to person in one person's life. But I know that Lawrence was right to launch a whole set of questions. And the questions that I had was, why is it that great sex so often fades for people who continue to love each other as much as ever, not for the troubled ones? And then, can we want what we already have? And then, why doesn't good intimacy guarantee great sex? And then, why does sex make babies and babies spell erotic disaster in couples? And then why is the forbidden so erotic? And time and again, the couples that I would work with would describe to me a kind of paradoxical union between our need for security and stability and predictability on the one side, and our need for adventure and novelty and mystery and danger on the other. And never in history have we tried to actually bring the comfort and the edge in the same place, and we live twice as long.
Please. What do you think, guys?
Does that launch a conversation?
I think that the live twice as long is probably one of the most important things to remember. It's something I explored in The Starter Marriage and the Future of Matrimony, which is to say that, only, at 1900, people were getting married and living until, they were in their late 30s, early 40s. And so marriage was something that lasted for 10 or 15 years, and then you died. Today, if you get married at, the age of first marriage in this country is still around 27, 26. So if you get married and you live until you're 85, that's 60 years of being with the same person. And so we're really dealing with a biological and practical reality that we never have before. So I think that there is obviously a lot to question about our assumptions about monogamous relationships under those circumstances. I mean, to be with the same person for 60 years is a tremendous undertaking.
And to expect to be sexually active with that person.
To even tolerate the person for 60 years.
My grandparents lived a really long time, but I think that by the age of 45 or so, they were pretty much done with sex, and they seemed perfectly comfortable with that decision. We're not perfectly comfortable with that decision. Because I asked them.
One of the few grandchildren that asked that question.
And they never lied to you ever.
Let me just, I'm not a psychoanalyst, but I am the adult child of psychoanalysts. I'm in recovery. Sociology is my form of recovery, and so that's so what do I do? I interview people. So I asked them.
To me, I don't really think that it's a question of time so much as I think the marriage is a form of socialization, and I think that consciousness is the villain here more than the question of eroticism in a long-term relationship. I think that bearing the burden of consciousness is the factor. This is what Freud talks about a little bit in Civilization is Discontents, because we are born with a certain libidinous, natural instinctual desire, but we live in society, and so the compromises that individuals have to make to be within a society. Now, I think that it's interesting that marriage is a dyad, and the dyads, I started to think about this recently, the dyads have a particular kind of a significance. I mean, in literature you see like in War and Peace and in Anna Karenina, Vronsky and Levin, Pierre and Andre. Beckett significantly has Didi and Gogo as the protagonists of Waiting for Godot. And I think that there's a very important kind of mirroring element that occurs within a dyadic relationship. That is to say, the existence, you see yourself through other people's eyes, and they see you through their eyes. So that I would argue that, in essence, not to criticize the institution of marriage, but that I would say that marriage is an extension of the biological life of the conscious human animal.
Can I ask you what you mean when you say the phrase that everyone seemed to agree with? When you say the phrase, great sex fades. Can you tell me what great sex is?
Yes. I'll tell you how I understand it. I actually was not interested in sex. I was interested in eroticism. Okay. And eroticism from the mystical point of view. When people complain about the listlessness of their sex lives, they sometimes want more sex, but they always want better. And the better that they are referring to is a sense of aliveness, of vibrancy, of vitality, a sense of an antidote to death. Mm-hmm. That's what they consider great sex. It has nothing to do with how often, how hard, how long, how many, no statistics and no medicalization.
Right, got it.
It has to do with a vibrancy and a sense of feeling alive. People dread deadness.
Yeah.
And deadness in the relationship is what I was really interested in. This is the first time in history where sexuality in long-term relationships, and I prefer we call that than marriage, if it's okay, is rooted in desire and not exclusively in reproduction or in female marital duty, at least in many parts of the world. Right. And how you sustain desire and how you accommodate, you blend what fuels desire with what fuels love, which are not necessarily the same, is a real existential challenge. And that's what I wanted to probe.
And I think that's interesting because I was introducing kind of sort of a psychoanalytic notion, but now I'd like to introduce a kind of contra-psychoanalytic notion into this discussion, because I think that really what is required in a certain sense is a form of imagination in the context of the creation of the relationship. That's my own. This is from my own personal experience, and I hate to introduce all these kind of literary allusions and citations, but I can't help thinking that when I started this morning to think about the Roundtable, and Ibsen was coming to mind. In Peer Gynt, one of his earliest plays, he creates this succession of dramatic tableaus in which the personality is completely changeable. And I think that in his later plays, it's all about self-realization, becoming closer to what the self, kind of concrete notion of the self against others. But in this particular one, I think that it's this chameleon-like notion of personality that is the saving grace in marriage, that you can play many roles, enact many different things within the safety of the marriage situation itself, and erotically enact many different things in a marital context, that people should be free, not to, in a certain sense that I say non-psychoanalytical approach, because I think people should be free to not be themselves within the marriage. They should act out other it's very much like we had a roundtable David Kirkpatrick was on about the future of technology, and we talked about this game Second Life, in which people have avatars, and they can become, it's a very, very popular universe to be in, because people can go and one of the most popular things in Second Life actually are the sex clubs. And what people do is they adopt identities. Well, what I'm saying in a certain sense is that we should question the very nature of personality in marriage.
In The Double Flame, Octavio Paz gives a very nice distinction. Sex is the primordial, it's the nature. Eroticism, is an act of the imagination. We are, in a way, maybe the only ones who can make love to somebody for 4 hours, have a fabulous time, and touch nobody. Because we can imagine it.
Sure.
And that is the distinction, between sexuality and eroticism, that it is infinitely varied and multiple and rooted in our culture and in our personal histories and so forth. But the act of the imagination is what I link to the breakdown of desire. And the question that you asked about monogamy, has to do, I don't think you can talk about monogamy in relation just to, is it a trade-off with sex? I think it has to do with the changing definition of intimacy. Yeah. Intimacy means something completely different today and really needs to be understood in order for us to understand what people come expecting from marriage, which never in history have we wanted. The same as what we always wanted, a companion, a family, economic support, respectability, and on top of it, you should be my best friend, my trusted confidant, and my passionate lover to boot, all in one. And sometimes it happens, but for a vast majority of people, it seems to not happen just at the...
Bravo. How do we know that? How do we know? That was an empirical claim. I'm an empiricist.
Yes.
How do we know that for the vast majority of people it doesn't happen? How do we know that?
Because I believe that in order to not be alone, we need to be two. But in order to be a couple, there needs to be a third hovering at the edge. And because after having gone to 20 countries and looking at sexuality multiculturally in traditional as well as in more emancipated societies, there seems to be a real challenge to have a sense that there is one person for everything. And that when that person when it doesn't work, it doesn't question the model. It just says, I chose the wrong person. Next time I'll do better.
Is it necessarily triangulation you're talking about, or could it be many people?
It's fantasy.
It's fantasy.
It's real. It's embodied. It's not.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be acted out at all. But there is a sense that for every person you chose, because today most of us choose our partner, there are the ones you haven't chosen, but they continue to exist somewhere, if not up there.
I mean, couldn't you say that the successful relationships, long-term relationships, whether they're marital or not, are the ones where the person lets go of that ideal, which is unrealistic to begin with? I mean, in a sense, that ideal, which is one that I heard over and over again when interviewing people in their 20s and people in their 30s about when they were in their 20s or in their teens, is something that's very naive, that you're going to find someone, who you'll have great sex with and who's going to be your best friend and your tennis partner, etc. And I think that once you actually mature and you're in a relationship, that you begin to let go of that ideal, and you begin, you can have many people in your circle, and once you let go in it, of that concept, that's when you become happy in a long-term relationship.
And some people do that giving up of that ideal by opting for non-monogamy as a way to balance the relationship, as a way to compartmentalize it. That is actually often experienced by some people as a form of, I don't know if they would call it solution, but as an attempt to deal with that very giving up of the idealization that you talk about. And by the way, it's been researched empirically by Peggy Klein-Platz, who is one of the foremost researchers on non-monogamous couples.
Why not do it on an imaginative basis? Why materialize it, though? What's the? I mean, I'm not saying it's good or it's bad, but I mean, what's the difference between imagining, having 4 people or 5 people in bed and it's all imagination, or actually acting these things out and having, other relationships in the world as the way you're describing?
Oh, I'm not going to become the advocate or the apologist for...
No, you just said
yes,
some people do it, some people don't. But, I always think that that's a very big step when you make the decision to actually enact in reality something that may have remained in fantasy.
But I think that the question has a few parts. First, I'm really very serious. I'm not going to be the defendant of this. Nobody has ever asked Esther Perel for the permission to cheat. They will do it if they want to do it.
Can I ask you?
Yes.
Permission?
Yeah.
Since no one had ever done it.
No.
But I think that
I'd like your blessing if I make that choice.
Ain't gonna come.
Yeah. Can I?
Ain't gonna come. None of you.
I'll give you permission if you give it to me. They're all acting as if it's not too late, huh?
It seems it's never too late. No, it seems to me that I would probably say that in the heterosexual world today, monogamy is assumed. It is the sacred cow of the romantic ideal. It has switched from an imposition on women and an economic matter to a matter of love and loyalty. And monogamy is translated in terms of sexual exclusivity rather than many other forms of monogamy that are also part of the relationship, that have to do with commitment, with loyalty, with the primacy of that relationship, and that are not just expressed in sexual terms. And then I would say that in the straight world, monogamy is not negotiated. And probably at some point it will become negotiated, because all boundaries of relationships at this point have been negotiated. We have an elastic view of marriage: single, blended, with children, without children, adopted, commuter. The boundaries of marriage have really expanded. The only one, the reigning queen, that is creating terror in people is the examination of the sexual boundaries, for a lot of psychoanalytic, powerful reasons beyond the social, I think.
I think when you redefine marriage, the reasons for being in a monogamous relationship, and you say, well, it's no longer as much economic or even socially imposed, and that now it's about love and the relationship. I still think that there is something biological and very practical that makes sexual monogamy important to a monogamous relationship in terms of disease, obviously, and sexually transmitted diseases, that it makes sense for people to demand sexual monogamy or to expect sexual monogamy in a monogamous relationship. And there's also the question of parenthood, and when you have a family, and the fact that you can, whether you're the man or the woman in the relationship, you can't establish and ensure paternity unless there's exclusivity.
You're all talking to me.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's your thesis.
You're the nominee.
You're the thesis. It's your thesis,
because
in a
of
way.
the title.
Yeah. I'm not persuaded.
Owen, step in here.
No, it's not my job.
I won't direct it to your comments then, Esther. I'll just direct it in generally. But I'm not persuaded yet. And I'm not persuaded, I think it's for three reasons.
Of what?
The first, that great sex has to fade. Or for, as you said, for the vast majority of people, it does. And my three levels are, one, the level of assumption. I think perhaps I don't share a set of assumptions with many of the people in this room, and I'll explain what I mean by that. The second is political, and the third is actually empirical. The level of assumptions, I think that there's a constant refrain that I've heard from virtually everyone that the erotic is the domain of the unequal. It's about mystery, the unknown. It's about maybe being out of control, power imbalance, etc. And I think that, and I think the one piece that I've not heard there, here comes the bridge to the political, is the effect, of course, of the avalanche. Pamela knows this better than anyone I know. The avalanche of images of what we are told the erotic actually looks like. Very rarely do you see domestic bliss portrayed as erotic. It's usually the feelings of being out of control, being powerless, being swept away. And I think so we come to think that. And so here's my political argument is a feminist one, which is to say the feminist project around heterosexual relationships is to enhance equality in the relationship. And I believe equality is super hot. What
do you mean by super hot?
What I mean by super hot is someone who is equal in desire. Someone who is my equal in desire. And so here's my empirical. I have two sort of sets of empirical data for this, because I think the case to be made here is actually a really powerful one, particularly to men. And that is the work of John Gottman, a psychologist at University of Washington, who many of you probably know. The guy wrote the book Successful Marriage. And Scott Coltrane, a sociologist at UC Riverside. And both of them have found basically this, that the more equal the marriage is, the happier it is. And I'll operationalize that for you in a moment.
In the kitchen.
Oh no. In the bedroom as well. Coltrane, for example, finds that men who share housework and childcare are not only happier, they see therapists less. That means some of you might not get to see them. They prescribe medication less. They're diagnosed with depression less. They are far less likely to drink, smoke, take recreational drugs. They report much higher levels of marital satisfaction. Their kids do better in school. Their wives are happier and healthier, and they have more sex. The more equal the marriage, the happier it is. And, by the way, guess which one of these great findings, happier children, better achievement, etc., guess which one made the cover of Men's Health magazine? Housework Makes Her Horny was their title. Not when she does it. So my argument is that equality in the marriage need not be the damper on eros that I think is a kind of assumption here. I'm not saying that I'm not putting this on you. I'm saying I felt these words of mystery, the unknown, being the words that we were using to talk about eroticism. And I was becoming a bit uncomfortable with those as the only words we use. To me, the known is the loved, and that to me is extraordinarily erotic. I think sharing housework and childcare not only gives us plenty more time, but also reduces the resentment that enormous numbers of women feel that they do all the housework and childcare. That you want to talk about a damper on eros, talk about resentment and anger. So I'm just suggesting that at the level of assumption in politics, a feminist critique of the traditional heterosexual marriage, that is to say, promoting egalitarian marriage, may in fact be something that liberates eros rather than dampens it.
So maybe the first thing we should do is this. it may sound, at least for me, I may sound sometimes like I talk with confidence, but I am sure of nothing I say. Okay? I don't have an answer. And I believe really that this is a subject without an answer, even though America loves to have answers for every problem, even the complicated ones. I also think that it changes from people to people, and more importantly, at different stages in our life. I think there are plenty of times when people will be monogamous around parenthood and switch later on. More and more, my thoughts are that most adults in the West will have 2 or 3 relationships in their adult life. It's just that some of them will do it with the same person. Okay? That is so. I have developed a much more developmental perspective on committed relationship than one marriage. Now, I think that maybe the way to phrase it for me, when I got interested in the dilemmas of desire and the intricacies of love and desire, I am a clinician. Okay, and the places where I went for inspiration was mostly not in the psychological literature. The sex therapy literature has nothing to say about relationships, virtually nothing, and the relationship literature has virtually nothing to say about sexuality, including Gottman, I may say. And a few of the others in the attachment world and a lot of that. So what I was interested in was poetry and literature, because they, and art in general, that have a capacity to describe how people can hold contradictory values at the same time and without having to collapse them. And that to me was really where I went to look for ideas. My understanding became this way, and it's really a thesis, if you want. It's not a truth, but it's a thesis that warrants conversation. It's what you asked about the poem. It just creates for a very interesting conversation. Love in some way needs closeness. It needs proximity. It needs to know. It thrives on that knowing. It wants that feeling of belonging. It wants to collapse the distance. Desire seems to need space to thrive. It needs a bridge to cross to get on the other side. The challenge of many modern couples today is to reconcile their wish for a safe, solid anchor in their partner, and in the same way have with that partner something that is more transcendent and more far-reaching.
Right.
And that is something that is utterly doable. And that, to me, is what I end up working on. I really don't spend much time thinking about great sex. I am spending much time thinking about how one's emotional history translates in the physicality of sex. I am interested in deadness. I am interested in how the multiple meanings of affairs, and from a non-judgmental, non-moralistic point of view, so that I can understand why people cross the boundaries and what they went to look for there. And those are the questions that interest me. And when I ask people all over where I've gone now, tell me moments when you find yourself most drawn to your partner, the answers unequivocally, and this is back to your thing, the only one that is gender-based is when women say, when I see him playing with the kids. Never the other way around.
Of course.
All the others have to do with when I see my partner passionate about something, when I see her at work, when I see him on stage, when he plays the piano, when we're galloping on our horse, when he's doing, it's when I see my partner as a separate person in their own individuality, and momentarily this familiar known person is once again somewhat mysterious and somewhat unknown, because you never know your partner fully. And in that space is the erotic elan. And first and foremost, it's never a space of caretaking, because caretaking is loving, but it seems to be mightily unerotic.
But that isn't a way to achieve that in a very practical way in a long-term relationship. I mean, to me, part of the problem that seems to exist is that people have this expectation of everything at the same time. It's sort of the old, a woman can have it all myth, that you can, have everything at once, which I think is now transitioning into this notion that women can have it all, but perhaps sequentially or cyclically. And I think that the same thing is true in relationships, because if you have periods in which you're a little bit distant from the person, then if assuming that the emotional and the love underpinnings of the relationship are strong so that it won't lead to rupture, you then get that distance that you're talking about, which then revives the erotic. So that, for example, and you know, in a very practical way, that works for people because, you know, relationships will go through long periods, for example, during the childbearing years, where pragmatically speaking, there's going to be that distance. But then you will get to the other side, even if it's, say, you know, 3 years later or 5 years later, where then that person has regained that mystery and that distance because you physically haven't been with them as much for a long time. Or, you know, what you often hear from men is that the woman becomes so enraptured with her children. But then, in a way, the children then become something for the man to then compete with to get the woman back. So I think that, I mean, it seems to me that if you think sequentially or cyclically in a relationship and you're assuming the long term, that you then have the ability to recapture that distance and that eroticism and that seeing the person as a separate.
Absolutely.
I have a little trouble, though, with, I mean, the statistics, you know, are interesting, but I think they discountenance the role of the fact that man is an animal, which I keep coming back to, and then the role of the irrational, which I think you were sort of alluding to a little bit, in the sense that you couldn't come to all kinds of conclusions about enormously complex phenomena. And so that I think that the irrational elements, like in other words, we are in a kind of a quandary now in culture to the extent of this egalitarian impulse, which is one of the Enlightenment. It's reason. It's reason over instinct. Reason functions on one level, but instinct is a total other level. And reasoning would make us think that equality was the natural state of being that man should aspire to. But then we have man as an instinctual, libidinous animal who is filled with all kinds of, you know, pressures and desires that can't be codified in such ways. And so how does that sort of manifest itself? Because it's an interesting sort of theme that's coming up, and you bring it up too, but it's not simply in terms of housework and so forth.
When you say man, do you mean man and woman, or you mean man? I mean man and women. Okay. Man and women. I mean homo sapiens. Okay. I mean that with the cerebral cortex. The cerebral cortex is to me the key element in the discussion of what the transmogrification of sexuality, how sexuality is transformed from the animal state. So I think that the key element really becomes one of this that we're sort of alluding to, but not so much in terms of the necessary pragmatic things that you've talked about in terms of house care, but in the fact that this notion of friendship, that there has been a change in society in which couples who are friends marry and negotiate the question of passion in a sort of different type of way. And within this context of this, and friendship is a more egalitarian institution. If you look at, you talk about literature, if you look in the literature of the 50s, if you look in Updike, if you look at Too Far to Go, the collection of short stories about the Maples and the dissolution of his own marriage, highly autobiographical set of short stories, and very touching. And in Cheever, you see a tremendous amount of marital infidelity. That's the subject of literature. Now I'll talk personally speaking. Within my nexus of friends, I only know one person who is a serial adulterer, and he does it kind of as a kind of artistic. He's a conceptual artist, really, you know, and he does it and has really nothing. It's more the legacy of a kind of bohemian tradition that he was born into. But I don't know nobody who's been cheating on.
Do the women say that too?
About what?
Would his partners also describe him as a conceptual artist, or more a con artist?
I don't know. He's very well known. He's known. They know what they're getting into.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I would like to make a distinction. You know, talking about monogamy and non-monogamy is one thing. You could call it monogamy and its discontents. You know, talking about infidelity or affairs or cheating or adultery or all the 20 other words that we have to talk about that act is a different subject.
Yeah.
We should decide, are we exploring monogamy and non-monogamy in relationships today, or are we talking about what motivates people to cross the boundaries, and people have done so from time in the Talmud, you know. So that to me is not the same conversation. The question of equality is not about house chores, it's about sovereignty. You know, it's about a sense of power. It's about what you called equal desire. It's about the fact that for the first time in history, women can switch from sexual duty to sexual pleasure. or sexual, wanting. There are women for whom the house chores are very arousing. But those are the women, or make them love their partner more because they are less resentful and therefore more inclined to engage with them sexually. But actually, these are women who need the quality of the relationship as the basis for their desire. For plenty of other women, that is not the mechanism. When he does the dishes, she may like him more, but it may do absolutely nothing in the bedroom.
Well, she may hate him more.
And furthermore, we have a proliferation of sexual explorations taking place in most societies these days that are all seeming to counter or to grapple with the consequences of the egalitarian model from a playful, erotic space. And then lastly, what I want to say is that there is a whole gay community, gay culture, gay model of relationships that has grappled with the question of how you combine monogamy of a different sort with a sexuality that isn't necessarily exclusive. And there's a lot to learn from how other people have already tried to do so.
Let me jump in for a second to try and structure a little bit what we've said up to this point, because it seems to me that a fundamental question that has underlain some of the exchanges is, what are the required conditions for erotic desire, for eroticism, for desire? I mean, we talk about it's been identified so far in terms of space and the perception of an other, but those are, after all, somewhat abstract, somewhat conceptual ways of discussing it. What does that actually mean? If, for example, sexual desire inevitably involves an element of conquest, that's why it has to be another, then there's a fundamental opposition between the security of marriage and the conditions for the erotic. Well, but what, in other words, why is it that there has to be this space and this perception of the other? How does that work? How does that create eroticism? I think, just as an aside, I don't think the question of equality in relationships is necessarily crucial, because equality doesn't mean identity. Even two people who are equal can have all kinds of ways in which they trade power differentials, as long as the bottom line is one of parity. So what are we really talking about when we talk about the fundamental conditions that are necessary in order to experience erotic desire? Why does it have to be another?
Well, I mean, I think that I agree with the idea that distance is necessary to desire. You don't want what you already have, obviously. But I think that if you're talking about what does this actually mean in a relationship,
right,
it can be anything from, as she said, as Esther said, seeing your partner in an atmosphere where they're loving something other than you, even if that thing is the piano at that moment, or that thing is their work, automatically puts you in competition with that other thing. And then that makes you want them. Right. It can be as simple as, if you're in a married relationship or a monogamous relationship, going out on a double date with another couple, because you then will automatically see your partner in that other man's eyes and also in the other woman's, and you will begin to think, how are they perceiving her? Did they just flirt with her? It creates an erotic distance.
So are you saying that insecurity is a primary requirement for erotic desire?
Requirement.
Laura, however, I'm just asking. I'm not trying to sell it. I'm trying to ask about it.
I wouldn't say that it's insecurity, but I would say that it is risk. It's a sense of risk. It's a sense of chance.
I like very much what you're saying, Pamela. I think that. So what you're asking is what fuels erotic desire. I don't think, again, I can tell you things that I have thought about, but it's maybe not so much distance as space. Because when you say distance, people very quickly begin to think of it as emotional distance. And that you can only have that space because you have the emotional security. That's what you were talking about before. For me, the issue is this. You never have your partner. The idea, can you want what you already have? You never have them. Your partner, you have them on loan with an option to renew.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
That one did not come from me, it came from a patient of mine.
But you never, I mean...
But you see, so the notion that in our quest for security today, I think we so badly want it because of the nuclear model and because of the concentration of having one person who needs to give us a sense of belonging and what we call significant other and recognition, that we have collapsed that space. Those are the mechanisms that we use to secure love that actually trample the very energy that brought a relationship into being. I think that when I say desire needs space, it needs otherness and stuff, people think of it as abstract. But when they answer me that question, where they're looking at the person from a certain distance, they get it. They get it. They never tell me, very, very rarely is it about we're looking at each other, 5 centimeters of each other and gazing to one. Because, by the way, if you bring the finger too close, you no longer can distinguish the contours. So transgression is a major element of what fuels the erotic, because transgression gives you a sense of power, a sense of freedom, and I think the erotic is highly bound up with freedom, with an ability to act on something, to go beyond boundaries, beyond rules, internal as well as cultural and political and social, even if it's only in your imagination, especially because it's in your imagination, actually, because you can find erotic, the very thing that you would be demonstrating against on the street the next morning. Yeah. That's the irrationality of our desire. It takes you to places where your rational, conscious being would never dare to go and want to go. What fuels erotic desire is, for many people, a sense of recognition, safety, complicity, familiarity that you're talking about. And I think the issue is this. For some people, the love and desire, or love and sex, are inseparable, and they flow. One leads into the other the way you describe, but for other people they're often far more incompatible, because it's sometimes more difficult to be ruthless with the person you love. And the question I had is, why is it that for so many people it's hard to make passionate love with the person they love? And part of it is because of the inability to have that space. Now, Proust has this beautiful line, oh la la, will I remember it? But it's something about, the true voyage of discovery is not to go to new places, but to look with new eyes. And so mystery is not that you suddenly, it's about the shift, the slight shifts of perception when you realize that you still don't fully know and the other doesn't still fully know you, and you don't wait for the day they cheated on you to tell me I didn't know him.
It's sort of what art in a way does, isn't it? That art allows you to take familiar objects and re-see them in a way that makes them, it restores their strangeness. Like the question of nakedness, for instance. You can see someone you've seen naked every single day, and you go to the bathroom with them. Some people do, some people don't. They have this incredible familiarity, and sometimes they look at themselves, and sometimes the body. It's an incredible thing that the imagination does. It either restores a certain degree of sexuality to the encounter, or it quotidianizes it and denudes it of all sense of the kind of mystery. Now, like, say I am what I was thinking of is, say I'm a reader of romance novels, and I decide I'm a male reader of romance novels, but I wish to be ravished like a woman in one of these romance novels. In other words, that my partner would suddenly, I wouldn't say the simple would be I'm a male and I dream of ravishing a woman. No, but I'm a male who would say I'm a male who dreams of being ravished by my wife. What are the possible personae? What are the possible combinations and permutations of sexuality that can exist? And I think you said it. There's a lot of fear about transgressiveness. In other words, this egalitarian thing kills, in a certain sense. It can kill some of the invention.
There's another word that needs to be introduced: anticipation. Eroticism, the erotic, the desire, is intensely fueled by the anticipation, the expectation, the looking forward to something, the imagination of it in advance. Spontaneity never exists. People always say, I want to go back to the spontaneity of the beginning. But in the beginning, there always was a plot. Desire always has a plot. It just took place in your own head before you went out on the date.
Sure. So, I think if consciousness is the villain here, and then consciousness has condemned us to this this thinking out of our sexuality, then consciousness has to be the thing to save us also. I mean, in other words, it takes work, is what it is.
Yeah.
A certain degree of consciousness.
Creative work.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, creative work.
If I understand you, consciousness is neither the villain nor the thing. Consciousness is what makes eroticism possible, rather than simply, animal activity. But if I understood what you guys are saying, it's something rather important, which is that love and intimacy are not the enemies of desire. The enemy of desire is a kind of cowardice that needs to deny the otherness of the loved one.
That's right.
And that makes that insecurity, that sense of risk, is I think the way you put it, possible. And that's the villain in long-term relationships. Not love, not intimacy, but that kind of denial of the otherness of the partner.
Anxiety about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean, again, I think I go back to that idea of wanting everything at exactly the same time.
Yeah.
Because I mean, in a healthy relationship, I think there's such a thing as healthy compartmentalization, where there's a time to have the totally egalitarian, you change the diaper while I go empty out the diaper pail thing, and then you can completely compartmentalize your sexual life very, very, very separately from that, and then achieve that distance while still having that intimacy in other spheres of the relationship.
Yeah.
I don't think they have to be contradictory.
I think it's a key thing. Compartmentalization is a key thing. It's invaded against so many times, but I think it's a key thing for the success of the inventiveness in relationships. I think it's key.
I was thinking a lot about the words that we're using, and again, I think that we do desire a great disservice if the only language that we use is a language of competitiveness and conquest, rather than also a language of sharing and surrender. I think we do it a disservice. I think it's all of those things.
That's
I
right.
would never suggest one model over another, but I would ask that we continually expand that possibility. And the other big change, it seems to me, that needs to be partly acknowledged in this sort of the longevity part, I think, is important. But this is this is the first generation or two of women who are equally entitled who feel equally entitled to pleasure.
That's right. I'm glad you finally brought up that word.
And that is really well.
How can you talk about sex and not use the word pleasure in an hour?
I was looking with I teach a class on sexuality at Stony Brook, and actually Pamela's visited that class when we talked about pornography. A class of 400 students, right? A course on intimacy. So, and we were just talking about Kinsey and the National Opinion Research Center studies on sexuality. And Kinsey in 1954 found that 41% of women over 25 had ever masturbated. And in 1996, and that's a pretty good measure of entitlement to pleasure, right? Like, I'm so entitled, I'll do it myself. And the 1996 Social Organization of Sexuality found that over 90% of American women had ever masturbated. And that is an enormous change. There's nothing even remotely like that among men, not even close.
It's a revolution.
So it is a revolution. So
is it a change, or did they reveal something they wouldn't have revealed then? Either way.
This is that's a very important point, because a lot of people think that the earlier data, women were far more reticent, far less likely to reveal. The truth is, Kinsey oversampled. His rates were actually higher than he should have gotten for three reasons. His first sample was college students. Then he hung out in singles bars and gay bars in Indianapolis. And the third group he got to talk about sex was in prison. And so his rates are actually quite a bit higher with people who are more likely to report in 1948 male sexual human male, 1954 human female, than would have been a nationally representative sample. So I think, in fact, 41% is probably high for 1954, but 90% for 1996 is probably about right.
I think there's a way to reconcile what you were saying earlier about the success, the fact that peer relationships and women's equality in relationships has enhanced relationships, and the concept that you were talking about the distance required for desire in some way. And I think that
They're not in opposition.
No.
I'm sorry?
They're not in opposition.
No, but I think they work very well together, because what they in effect create is that for a man who, you watch Mad Men men, for example, and for a man who comes home to January Jones's character every day, there's nothing new or interesting in that character. She's incredibly boring to come home to. But a woman now, the man is constantly seeing that woman in a competitive position. He's constantly seeing, he's competing with the workplace for her time. He's competing with a greater social respect for her time and attention. And so I think that it then makes sense that men are more sexually happier sexually more satisfied with peer relationships, because it does create that sense of, I know that you don't like the word competition, but it does create that competition and that desire.
It goes back to something that Owen said earlier, and I want to make a distinction. I think that we often think that equality means sameness. I think that's a terrible mistake. That's basically how we delegitimated communism or socialism, was it would make everyone the same. And I think when we think of gender equality, the fear that I hear from people is it will be androgyny. Women and men will be so much the same. There won't be any friction anymore. I think that the trick for us, and I think that some part of what I like that in your book a lot, was this idea that what we want is to both be respectful of difference, but within the context of equality. That seems to me to be the really. That's the thing that we need. The place I think we need to go.
But Michael, that's the consequence of American feminism versus European feminism.
Maybe.
American feminism proposed the notion of sameness. This is the only country where maternity leave is a disability.
Right.
You know, European feminism really looked at...
That's not a feminist reform to make it a disability.
No.
That's the way
But they fought for it.
Controlled corporations institutionally dealt with the fact that women wanted parental leave.
They fought for it. There was a collusion. They fought for it. American feminism really did very much want to look at equality from a position of sameness, but that's not so important.
I don't think that's true.
I think that one way in which that plays out in a negative way in American relationships, as compared with European, is that in Europe, maternity is also eroticized in a way that it is completely not here, and quite the opposite, which I think...
Multicultural feminism is all about difference. It is all about difference.
But
it's founded on difference.
But I wanted to actually go back to something you said before. You seem to be cautious, and in a very important way, about abuses of power and about misuses of power. For me, and I didn't use the word conquest, I think Owen did, but you know, when you conquer someone, somebody surrenders on the other side.
Not necessarily.
In the dynamic of the erotic, when it is voluntary, when it is playful, here are the words missing for me on the conversation about eroticism. Pleasure, which you finally uttered. Eroticism is the cultivation of pleasure for its own sake, with no other purpose attached. Playfulness. Playfulness. Many people who seem to have no desire for sex anymore in their relationships simply don't have desire for the sex they can have in their relationships. It has become repetitive, boring, no anticipation, nothing to look forward to, no cultivation of that desire. And especially in the difference between men and women, if you want to put it in that sense. But for me, men and women is not just a man and a woman. It's a continuum, you know. And then I think that power is intrinsic to the erotic and to desire.
Subject populations are rarely playful.
Say that again?
Subject populations are rarely playful.
What does that mean?
I think that equality enhances the capacities for playfulness that you were exactly describing.
Yes, in some situations.
I don't think Genghis Khan was a very playful fella either. I don't think conquest and submission involuntarily, like on Mad Men, for example, maybe the things that reduce or diminish the capacities for playfulness and pleasure as we're describing.
For me, what secures the capacity for playfulness has nothing to do with equality. It has to do with a secure sense of attachment. When you have a little child that sits here on your lap, And at some point, like all little children, they want to hop off and go and look and explore and see what is out there in the world. And at some point, that little child is going to turn and look at the adult who is here. And if the adult who is here says, go for it, kiddo, enjoy, the world is a fabulous place, what does the kid do? Goes further and experiences connection and separateness, or connection and freedom at the same time. But if the little child turns around and there's a person here who says, what's so great out there? Don't you miss me? Didn't we used to have such a fabulous time? I'm anxious, I'm depressed, I'm lonely, and the rest. Then the little child has two choices. Either they come right back to base and they understand that in order to not lose you, I'll lose a part of me. And that will often be the person later on, from what I have understood, that will have a harder time making love to the person they love. Because love will become burdensome to them. When I love you, I feel responsible, I feel beholden, I feel burdened, and it will take away the unself-consciousness and the freedom that is necessary for desire with the person that you love. And then there's a few other options that little kid can have. So for me, equality is not what leads to playfulness per se. It may, but a sense of security, the way you were talking about it, that allows you to then go and experience that space and that freedom does. When you ask people to look at love and to look at desire or sex, and they free associate to it, there's a few things that are really very outstanding to me. Warmth, acceptance, always appear here. Excitement appears there. Hunger, greed, power, heat. This is warm, this is hot.
Right.
You know, this is tender, this is acceptance, this is about something else. And I think that they coexist inside of us. There's absolutely no need to kind of dichotomize them.
Earlier you suggested that we look to the gay community. That's exactly, since the phrase, as you just described it, which I think is exactly spot on. The phrase that the way to reduce risk for STIs and particularly HIV is, of course, safe sex, which, as you just described it, is an oxymoron.
There is no safe sex. There are safe relationships.
And that's why the gay community's response to that is, how can we make safe sex sexy?
That's right. And
how can we eroticize responsibility?
Yeah.
That's also been a feminist project, eroticizing responsibility around birth control. Because women need to know, and also around sort of sexual assault, women need to know that their bodies, that their body's integrity is going to be respected, that their boundaries will be respected, that no means no. You don't get to yes without knowing that no means no.
Michael Chernoff, if any of you ever knew him, who was the instigator and the creator of all the safer sex program for GMHC in the early 80s and just died, you know, it was all about that, to eroticize safer sex. My sentence often is, there is no safe sex, not in the sense of STD. There is no safe sex in that if you really want to take it to a place that is beyond performance and mechanics and orgasm and result, then you got to go to a place that is extremely vulnerable, that the immensity of our needs and our longings and our quests manifest itself in the erotic in ways that words can sometimes not even begin to capture. And that's the risk, that's the vulnerability that some people have an easier time experiencing outside than at home.
So then, just to summarize what we've been talking about, when you make the analogy to the child who leaves the mother and so on, the paradox is... Or father, quite right. The caretaker, yes. The paradox is that the secure attachment gives the individual the courage to experience risk. Now, in the long-term relationships in which eroticism dies, it isn't because the attachment is insecure. It's because the courage to face risk goes away. In other words, when you talk to people with relationships in which eroticism has died, it's not like they're saying, I don't feel any more securely attached to my partner. They feel securely attached, but they wonder where the magic went. So that there's a paradox here. Just want to make sure we don't exclude the other side. It's not just that the relationship as a precondition has to offer a secure enough attachment. It has to somehow allow the possibility of facing risk?
So I think that the unknown is inherent to desire. But faced with the unknown, people can have a few responses. You can stay open to it and welcome the persistent mystery of your partner, or you can respond with anxiety. And for me, the question is the issue of certainty. You know, I think love is never certain. It is inherent that the potential of loss is part of love. And if you want to pretend to create an illusion of certainty, then you often will collapse the ingredients that make for the erotic, which is surprise, difference, novelty, imagination, and all of those things. And that's when you see the people are no longer able to do what I think Pamela describes very well in the more practical way, to respect that individuality. You know, to be able to see your partner play the piano, you have to be comfortable that your partner is enjoying the piano without thinking, well, why don't you want to spend time with me? You know, and again, you're playing the piano, and maybe you're avoiding me because by playing the piano, and why am I not able to be everything for you, and etc., etc. And so this is, for me, the issue is really more anxiety over that space. Now, you know, we believe in permanence in the West. We think there is such a thing as certainty. We think there is such a thing as reality. And sometimes I wonder, you know, if when you opt for reality instead of passion, maybe you've just traded one fiction for another.
I understand what everybody is doing, namely trying to find certain more general ways to describe what happens in a relationship. But having seen people for over 30 years in detailed way, day after day, what I'm most impressed with is the difference between the individuals. It's very hard to make a statement about the research that you cite, that because there is equality, there's more desire. In some people, there seems to be, in some others, it seems to have completely the opposite effect. It seems a lot to do with the nature of people's fantasies and the degree of anxiety that is the motive force of those fantasies. The higher the level of anxiety, the more the need to escape into those kinds of fantasies with other women or other men and so on, the more you have a problem. Going back to your piano analogy, it seems to me if a patient came to me and said, every time I play the piano, my husband gets turned on, I think the husband has a problem. So I think it's very, very difficult to generalize.
What's the problem again?
Touché.
The problem is he doesn't let her finish playing the piano.
That makes sense.
Or they do it on the piano.
The other thing that came up in terms of intimacy, it seems to me that sexuality is necessary for intimacy. It is impossible to have real intimacy in the absence of sexuality. You can be naked with each other, go to the bathroom with each other, have dinner with each other, but you are not intimate. The level of intimacy that is achieved through sexuality is what I would consider to be the real level of intimacy. The capacity to let oneself go in a situation which involves the sexual act. So,
I think that there are two tensions between the vulnerability aspect and the intimacy that I think end up becoming the problem of mating in captivity. One is that if you have an assumption of intimacy and you're with someone for, say, 15 years, and secretly you have some kind of sexual desire that your partner is not aware of, then it's almost an act of betrayal. It can feel like an act of betrayal then for one partner to reveal to the other, well, this is what I actually want, because there's that sense, well, then who are you, this person that I thought I knew so well, that I've been with all this time, which then makes that person then more fearful of revealing and of getting to that very vulnerable place that you're talking about. The other thing I think that often gets in the way is that the more intimate you are the more you obviously are able to hurt the person you're with. And so if you've been with someone for 20 years, there are obviously going to have been opportunities to get angry and to have hurt that person. And that therefore, sexually, you're then all the more unlikely to get to that vulnerable place or to open up in that way, because you know that this is the person that can hurt you best and probably already has if you've been with someone for, 10 or even 5 years.
That's the case. I think the opposite could play just as well. That the more intimate you are, the more safe you feel, and the more the person hurting you today doesn't mean they're going to hurt you tomorrow.
But I think what you highlight is that for everything we say, we could also say it's opposite, and it would also have merit.
That there's such
and that's
complexity.
very beautiful. The question, Stephen Mitchell talks a lot about this, since we are in a psychoanalytic place, that notion that it's kind of what's at stake in opening up that way to the person that you depend upon for so much, And he, the question of what is the real nakedness, and can you have, can you experience that kind of intimacy? I think that there's a distinction between touch, sensuality, sex, and eroticism. They're not one and the same.
Yeah.
People who don't get touched, like children, become aggressive, irritable, not good. Some relationships can remain intensely affectionate without having remained sexual. And who is to say that this is problematic? Some people, what you were talking about before is that lots more relationships today are actually formed with the project of making a family and with security, partly because we are committing ourselves later on, and because many people have had plenty of passion and it didn't give them much stability, and now they want a secure thing. And the ones who come in my office saying we never had it, it's much more complicated, because they know why they chose each other and they are reluctant to let go of that. Yeah. The ones who say we lost it, then you wonder, where did they disconnect from themselves? There is no sexual relationship with someone else if you are sexually disconnected from yourself, from your own body, from your capacity to experience sensuality, etc. The ones that you talked about earlier, about the women with the children, the centrality of children today and the way that parenting is taking place has really created a kind of eros redirected. When I see the descriptions of the holding in the arms and the tickling and the nibbling and the licking, and it's just about the same description as the 3 nights they spent 15 years ago in the hotel with their partner. It's intensely erotic. And so sometimes at the end of the day, when she says, I have nothing left to give, I'm thinking maybe there's nothing more you need. And you had it. But in the old rules of the game, she could go into motherland and intensive care of childcare and being with the children because he had the right to go to the brothel. Mm-hmm. And there was an equality, if you want to use that word. There was an arrangement.
That's not what I'm talking about.
There was an arrangement. I'm not caring about equality. Today it's different, because you ask the person to stay put and wait in a way that people have not had to wait before, and hope that one day you will not mistake my invitation for a demand and answer me by saying, I've got 3 kids, I don't need another one. And to understand that there is an invitation and that there is roles, as you were talking about, in relationships according to stages, where there is one person who is preserving the family and another person who is preserving the relationship. Because families today will only survive if the couple does well. There's not many other reasons to keep it together.
And I think they have to be evolutionary. I think they have to be kind of evolutionary. And in other words, that's what I was talking about in the very beginning. They have to be willing to wear different guises. Like, I'm sort of concerned about these definitions. Intimacy and sexuality. What about sexuality without intimacy?
That's right.
So what? How can you possibly? And what you said about patience, how it's so sui generis to make these overarching, kind of definitions. But I did want to say one thing, and I'm touting my own. But this book, Erotomania, Pennsylvania has gotten a lot of press comparing it to Henry Miller and Bukowski. And I am a product of my own time in a certain way. I mean, I'm not only the author of the book, but society is the author of the book. And the one thing about this particular book that's so interesting in terms of our discussion is that, and I only have conceived of this retrospectively because I haven't really ratiocinated about the book really, I just wrote the book, is that all of this reputed sexuality takes place in a monogamous relationship. They have no other relationships with anyone else throughout the book, and they act this thing out constantly in their own relationship. So there is something about mating in captivity that's very apropos of our time, I think, and within the history of sensibility. I think this is kind of the real question. I mean, I think a lot of attention and kind of concentration of interest is being placed upon the dyad now. And as I was trying to say earlier, the literature records the fact that in earlier decades, even near decades of history, that there was much more of the concept, even perhaps even due to the kind of lack of egalitarianism in society. There were many factors, but that that adultery was considered it was like a rite of passage within the marriage. It was what couples went through, you know. And now it's more, there is a different kind of idealization going on in a strange way.
Well, I want to ask this. I'm not at all persuaded by this idea that only with sex is real intimacy possible, that you argued before. I'm not at all persuaded by that, and I think what we have witnessed, and I think I agree with the argument that you're making now. I think what we've witnessed over this century has been the increased sexualization of intimacy. And if you look, for example, at memoirs of soldiers who held each other while they were dying and wept in each other as they held each other's guts. Henry V, he who sheds his blood with me will be my brother. Probably the greatest line in all these Guyland things. All of these evocations of the brotherhood, all of these evocations of male-male bonding in the 19th century. That is as intimate as men's lives got. And it was not at all sexual.
Well, I think it's a definition.
What I'm suggesting is that the intimacy has become, because of the absolute hegemony of the marital couple, the dyad that you're describing, we have now so sexualized that intimacy that we've made them inextricable, as you say. But I think we've also failed to explore what's possible in terms of intimacy outside of sexualizing it. And I think religious mystics are unbelievably intimate with each other, and it's not necessarily sexual, but it's surely erotic.
Look at George Foreman and Muhammad Ali. They had 3 bouts, and they became incredibly, and they developed an incredible intimacy, and also Ali and Frazier bouts. Where the dueling and the fighting within their contests, their duels are what brought them together.
I think intimacy's become impoverished when we just sexualize it.
I think you misunderstand I think you misunderstand it.
Okay.
Look, you can have an intimate friend, and you can have an intimate relationship with a lot of people. But I think in a relationship, let's say in a marital relationship, the absence of sexuality, the absence of sexual closeness would not allow the kind of intimacy to continue to exist and to develop. So that it's a question of...
But I think that there's a way in which what you're talking about negatively impacts monogamous relationships between men and women, which is to say that I think that while it's not true for female friendship, it does seem to me that male friendships are relatively impoverished and with that lack of intimacy today, and that male friendships tend to be very superficial, and that what that ends up doing is then it raises the male...
That's not so.
I think that it creates an intense need for intimacy for the man in the relationship with the wife that then becomes a burden.
Of course it's true. It's empirically.
I think that, I mean, again, I really hope we're not just going to do binary Mars and Venus, but the question that you ask about in the relationship itself, can you have an intimacy that isn't sexual? Then I would like to add, the issue is not about just doing it. There are plenty of couples who do it, and that doesn't make it sexually intimate or intimate at all. And I like your phrase that intimacy has become impoverished, but I understand it a little different. I think that, intimacy used to be we plow the land together. It's a convivencia, and it's a companionship for life. And then it kind of switched, and the whole history of it is less relevant, to a discursive experience. Intimacy is I talk to you, and I reveal to you my internal world, because intimacy in the new definition emerged at the same time as the concept of self, and you are going to reflect back to me, and in that interaction or transaction, I will know that I matter. Right. And I will momentarily transcend my existential aloneness. That, to me, is in the West what intimacy has come to mean. My West African patients don't know what the hell I'm talking about. This is very... So now intimacy, in my opinion, in some way, has become paramount and at the same time narrowed, not because of the sexualization of intimacy, but because in some way what some people have called a kind of feminization of intimacy, i.e. the privileging of talking over the expressiveness of the body. And that it is an undervaluing of the body as our mother tongue, long before we can utter any words, and as the body as being able to express, and sometimes even to express feelings that some people are more reluctant or have more difficulty articulating in words. And that is not about sexualizing intimacy. There's plenty of sexualization in our society, but I do think romantic love sexualized intimacy, because that was the point of it. Otherwise, you went for the passion and for the erotic somewhere else, if anywhere at all, and mostly the men, because it was too dangerous for the women.
But why would you call that feminization when we had the evocation of civilization as discontents earlier, which was women represent the body, men are the talkers, men are the culture builders? Why would you come full circle and call that feminization?
Because the body of women was controlled. It's like when people say women want security, men are the roamers. Yeah, you're revolutionary thing. I always think if women were so domestic, why did every civilization put about so many systems for oppressing female sexuality to keep it in check?
That's right. That's
if she's so domestically inclined anyway. But the body of women was not a place that women could freely go and explore, and certainly not sexually, until the democratization of the contraception. It was simply too dangerous. And so the body of the woman as a source of public pleasure that is not for decoration and display. And
her subjectivity as opposed to being constructed as an object.
True, and the ability to make the body be this language without it becoming the language of those kind of women. So that she has to wrap it around 5 layers of relatedness to make it okay to then be able to experience the flesh in a non-vilified, prostitutionalized kind of way. That's what I think has happened. So that when you deprive one group, men or women, from the language of the body, and you deprive the other group from the language of words, you create a bit of a mess. And by the way, the other word missing for eroticism is tension.
Yes, well, and along that line, because I don't want Ed's point to get lost. I mean, Michael, in terms of what you were saying, the kind of intimacy between men that has been lauded in the St. Crispin's Day speech, that it's about shared dangers and shared adventures. And who's to say that that's not erotic? Because as Esther said, it's not just about doing it.
It's
and
feeling
who knows
alive.
what they did in the tents anyway.
Of course.
But
you feel alive.
We know.
But when that is lost in a marital relationship, a long-term heterosexual relationship, I think Ed's point would be, then you get a pseudo-intimacy. You get a deadening. And when that is kept alive, that sense of shared adventure and willingness to confront dangers together, then you get the kind of possibilities that you guys have been talking about that permits recognition of the vulnerability to loss of the other, recognition of the difference from the other, the distance from the other, and then that's expressed and maintained through sexuality. And so absence of Ed's point, I don't want to speak for you, but would be...
You're doing very well.
So far. that absence of sexuality in a long-term relationship is an alarming possible symptom of the failure of true intimacy.
Can I look at it like this? Sorry.
Caveats accepted.
Right.
Alarming
Truly.
possible, but
Yeah,
you know,
right.
I'm thinking, you know, you're talking about risk taking, and I want to echo, you know, Esther's point about it. It's not about doing it necessarily. What bigger risk can a couple possibly take together than bringing a child into a world that seems hell-bent on destroying itself? That seems to be massive risk-taking.
That's
and
only
you
if
do
they
it in
think
a
about it.
partnership. You know what I mean? That's a risk.
Well, I think biology
So
is
it shouldn't
being a bit
kill.
underplayed. Biology has a lot of role in all of this. It has a role in desire, it has a role in procreation, it has a role in all of those things that we've been talking about. And that's what keeps pushing.
And it doesn't know about equanimity.
The more curious thing is how come with so much pressure with biology, sometimes couples don't have any sex for months.
Because the same person, I mean, this is not because, but, you know, I was at this conference not long ago, and it was 400 urologists and OB talking about female desire. And they're desperate to find a Viagra for women. Right. And at one point they talk about the hormone, and all of this is biologically really, really true. But put the same woman in front of somebody who is now compelling, and I promise you the next day she has no problem of hormones.
For how long?
It doesn't matter. It's always the same time. It was the same time when she was in her 20s as it would be in her 50s. The pheromones do wane after 2 years. But the question that you're asking about the man, you know, when you say it's erotic, for me it means it's alive.
Yeah.
Okay? And I would say that one of the powerful connectors I see with a longing, because the word is longing and yearning, for this erotic, when couples have kind of lost that certain vitality, that energy, often is linked to a sense of loss. You've gone to the doctor and gotten bad news, a friend has died too soon, or your parent is gone. And there is something at the level of sexuality, that this is the place where you can feel alive in opposition to death, at a level that is sometimes unmatched. And it can be autoerotic or with a partner. That is the primitive primariness of it that I think is really unique, you know. And what I've become very intrigued by is, especially when I look at non-monogamy, is the connection between that sense of loss and the longing that make people have what Mitchell used to call acts of exuberant defiance.
Okay, I think maybe this is the moment at which we invite the rest of you to join in. And please, I think for the sake of the video recording and so on, identify yourself if you
And
have the
move
video
to the...
and move to the microphone as well.
Where?
I think there's one.
Oh, really?
Please,
Go up to the
just go up to the microphone.
Oh. Yeah, you got to go.
You just found out?
We're live.
I had no idea.
You're getting it.
I knew that by audio.
I just wanted to, because I'm struggling.
Your name
Say
is
who you are.
David Kirkpatrick. There's a subjectivity to the inevitable in this kind of discussion that I'm more impressed by than I was when I came in. That's my own opinion. And because I have that opinion, I would be very interested to know the marital history of each of the panelists. Because I feel that it must be a factor in some of their opinions. So that's my question.
Great question.
You want us to be intimate with you, I see. Share a little risk.
Or naked.
Well, anybody feel like rising to the challenge? Or?
Well, I mean, do we want to? Go ahead.
There you go. Since my first book was about the starter marriage, I was married briefly in my 20s for a year, and then and now I'm remarried, and I have 2 young children and another on the way. So I'm in the least erotic time of my life.
No.
I had a starter marriage. I'm deliriously happily remarried for 15 years, and I have a 9-year-old son.
I've been married since 1982. I have 2 children.
Let's see, I had a very brief early marriage. I would even hesitate to call it a starter marriage. It was more like a moment in time. And then I was married for almost 30 years. Ultimately, we got divorced. It was great for a long time, but then it went south at the end, and she unhappily died sometime after. And have two grown girls in 30 and 28.
Your turn.
Yeah. No. Esther, your turn.
My turn. I am with the same man for 25 years. We have a 12 and a 15-year-old, and we've had 3 marriages together. I met him at 22, I married at 27, and I just turned 50, and I've had 3 marriages with the same guy.
You literally had marriage ceremonies?
No, just a complete different relationships, you know.
Yeah.
Is it better now?
Which one did you like the best?
The one. Well, the first one was a powerful illusion that I had to mightily give up.
Ça va sans dire ça.
The second one was a fight about recovering the illusion. And the third one has been wonderful. Is wonderful.
Yeah, please.
I have a question. I can direct it to Esther. My name is Elaine Pass. I'm a physician. I was married, divorced, and I have a 34-year-old son.
Now everyone has to get their marital.
Yeah, right. Everybody. Yeah. No one's going to ask any more questions now.
It is useful.
Do you have a green card or a passport? We should do the immigration too.
Okay, my question has to do with age. I'm going to be 70 December 4th. And as I progressed in my attachment to myself, there are no guys around. They're all dead, because of the longevity of women. Mm-hmm. Like, I find this in my practice, since I'm an older practitioner. Most of my patients are older women not because of my bad, medical practice, but guys drop like flies. So, just in the room itself, there are the average age is much younger than what I am. But I'm finding, I have this discussion was great, but what happens with age? Like, I know, I measure everybody's testosterone levels, and I found the elixir to be testosterone, both for men and women, but be that as it may, just the bonding with somebody, to go with a younger guy, I could just throw up, the thought of that, because your bodies are so different. The thought of going out with somebody, even 20 years younger than me, I'd be comparing my body to his, and I said, oh my God, this is terrible, my breasts are on the floor. They don't care. Well, guys, so my question has to do with the fact that women really do live much, much longer than men, and what do older women...
But I think you have 2 points to what you're asking, and I'm curious what you will say. First is what happens to sexuality over age, and the second one is what happens to the lessening of opportunities to bond with someone over age. It's 2 different themes, though.
Can you address both?
Right. And with some concrete answer.
For the second
websites, phone numbers.
one, you should check in with me in 20 years. I don't know. Here is what I would say for the first one, which for me and for, I think, probably is a little more tricky in this society, that has a real cult of youth like that, is that maybe the libido is stronger when you're young, but the mind is much freer when you're older. And if people had, sometimes I would say, if I had the confidence of today with the looks of then, but then I was whining and complaining all the time, and now I am actually not the same, and I am there is something about age that actually finally gives you the right to do what you want, the right to go to places that you never dared go before. So I am of the view that for many people, and again, all the statements that are generalized should be qualified, I experience that their sexuality becomes better. it can go one way or the other, but there's a whole group of people for whom their sexuality becomes better because the erotic mind frees up. And the more the body changes, the more the mind becomes the place of riches.
But what do you do with the scarcity of men?
The scarcity of men is a fact of life that I don't have anything. There's a sociologist here. Maybe he's a demographer as well. I don't know. You need to take that one on.
Sociologists speak to that?
You want to know where the men are? I mean,
She said they fall like flies. It's very difficult to answer that. What's to say?
And they're going out with 30-year-olds.
Right.
So, right.
Can I just address Joanna Whitcup?
Hello, Joanna.
Hello. I want to address your point because it's very plaintive, the way I hear you talking about it.
Thank you.
We have also learned that the sexuality of women is very plastic. And I think as women get older, they're going to start looking at other women. And it's going to find a way to have a different kind of sexuality and intimacy than they may have to find when they were younger.
I think if I can add on what Joanna says, plasticity is a beautiful concept for looking at female sexuality, meaning that the sexuality of women changes throughout her life. She can discover things in her 40s that she never knew existed in ways that for other people it's often much more kind of a blueprint that is layered earlier on. She can switch orientation in the course of her life back and forth. She can experience her body very differently. And that actually, rather than limiting the possibilities for women with age, actually expands it. And that is often not articulated enough. There is an enormous investment in wanting to see men as sexual and women as not.
Well,
basically.
I think demographically, that's already playing out because there is a growth in the number of women who are living together later in life.
Sure. You're talking about that limitation for men and the freedom for women, the increased plasticity for women as a culturally determined thing, no? That culture sanctions a great deal more experimentation. For example, female homosexuality in various expressions has always been much more tolerated in our culture here than male homosexuality. So that's what you're referring to, yeah.
And culturally as well as psychologically.
Yeah.
I'm Joel Whitebook from Columbia Psychoanalytic, and I have a question for the whole panel. Otto Kernberg wrote a series of articles, which I found very interesting, on the couple in the group. And he asked the question, which you're all addressing in one way or another, what makes a couple stay together? And his answer is that the same thing that makes a couple stay together
is
also what makes them break up. And the argument is this, that in a mature couple, for lack of a better term, there is enough intimacy and enough sense of safety that they can really explore what's been called the transgressive, the dangerous, the imaginative, and so on. But he specifies it more. He says they can really express their archaic sexuality, especially their sadism, and Stoller's work has to come in here. And that as long as that is sufficiently expressed, and as long as there's the safety to do it, that keeps the couple alive. But when it gets out of control, when it goes too far, and there isn't a container for it, that's what often makes a couple break up. And in terms of this question about equality, I mean, if you take Kernberg's position, there's really not an opposition between equality and desire, because here are two adults who really claim the right, which is quite a radical thing to do, to say you're an adult, you're free to do what you want with your body, your mind, your imagination, and to indulge in it. So you're equal in the sense that you're both sovereign sexual adults who are claiming their rights to pleasure and excitement. But I especially want to stress the thing about the role that aggression and destructiveness plays.
I mean, Kernberg has a whole series of articles on aggression and sexuality, and I actually think that there has been an attempt, because of the ways that we have wanted to purge the abuses of power, to neutralize power and aggression from desire. And that's where the problem of the egalitarianism comes in. Not equality, egalitarianism. There needs to be a certain power differential. Sexually, that doesn't necessarily need to happen in the raising of children or in the management of many other aspects of life. And in the name of wanting to, condemn aggression, it got purified of it at a level that completely tames it and flattens it. And, you know, desire does not play by the rules of good citizenship.
Two equal partners can act out their fantasies of aggression and domination and what have you in the privacy of their own bedroom, and it doesn't mean that they're going to be abusive to each other outside of their bedroom.
That's right.
Ed, you were talking to me about aggression, and so you were working on this area a little. Yeah, okay.
Did anybody want to comment on the thing that Joe brought up about the genie getting out of the bottle as a reason that that people break up? You know, the Kernberg's thesis. Has that been your experience, that you found that to be the case?
My experience is that, you know, the very thing that attracts you initially because it is different is the thing that drives you up the wall later because it is different.
The only thing I would say, in response to that thing about a power differential is the absolutely great thing to me about women's increased equality has been the exposure of the fluidity of that power, and how easily it moves, and how it's not fixed. Gender used to simply be a proxy for power imbalance.
That's right.
But the good thing, it seems to me, about feminism is that it can no longer be so in the context of a relationship. Politically, obviously, institutionally, it's still quite salient. But so it becomes more fluid, and that is, I think, unbelievably freeing both to women and to men.
I think what you, as well as the men that just spoke about, Joel, sorry, and Francis, is the centrality of fantasy, you know, and that's what you are talking about, is this idea that, you know, the relationships live in the shadow of the third, and that fantasy in some way is an imaginative, exquisitely efficient way to bypass the conflicts and the pitfalls of familiarity and the negative aspects, if you want, of intimacy.
It's also the basis upon which we mentally represent other people. I mean, what I see when you see someone, you form an image of them in your mind. This is a creation.
Please.
Yes, my name is Kimmel. I'm an individual and couples therapist, and I just wanted to comment on what the last person said. I see a lot partners wanting different things from each other, so that one person might be able to take risks and explore and be separate enough to want to know where they can go with their partner, and the other person is very happy with status quo. So, I mean, we talk about the couples a lot as a dyad, but in a couple, they're two very different people.
Great question.
Yes.
Yes.
Help.
But that can become apparent sometimes only over time.
Right.
But it's not fixed in stone. I mean, if you let's go back to the movie like Persona, where you starts off with the nurse who is the gregarious Bergman's persona, the gregarious nurse, and the actress who is practically autistic. By the end of the movie, it's taken a complete reversal, where the nurse is now completely quiet, and it's the actress who's constantly seeking her attention. Yeah. And you find that in couples where the progress of the relationship is if one couple stops enacting the very thing that which they started, then the other one someone takes up the slack.
Yeah, they do something different. Yes. So thank you.
I think that what I like in your question is that you didn't say one wants and the other one doesn't. You said one wants certain things and the other one wants other things. Sure. And that's a much more nuanced question. And I think maybe, you know, as a therapist, sometimes I ask, you know, do you still have sex with each other? But that doesn't tell me that much. But I am very interested in the question, what does sex mean for you? What do you look to sex to provide you? What do you want to experience in sex? Escape, rebellion, surrender, connection, spirituality? What do you go for that sex can allow you to experience? And that's when the differences of what they want to do actually start to get a larger meaning about why it is that this is what they want to do. That's the beginning of the answer.
Why is this power thing always put in the gender term, though? I mean, it's coming up as a male, female. I mean, it seems to me that when you take relationships, homosexual relationships, or there's usually one person in a relationship who plays a certain role, and another person plays another role. So if it's no longer gender-based. It strikes me. I mean, it's
not gender-based at all.
Yeah,
I think that
it is. I think it's whoever is currently seeing the other person's a competition for the other person's affections. That then becomes the aggressor or the chaser or the one, and the other person has the power.
That's good.
And then that in a healthy relationship, I think that's fluid and changes throughout.
Well, I'm told that our time has come to an end, so I would like to thank all the panelists, and I hope that you all are very excited.
Further information about our programs and a complete archive of past Philip Tatey's events is available at philiptateys.org.